Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Stephanie Olarte, and I am moderating today's event. I am representing the Womxn Project, which is a statewide organization based in Rhode Island. We're dedicated to building a strong movement that harnesses the power of art, activism, and advocacy to dismantle systems of oppression and uplift the voices of people in our communities. We want to shift power and shape policies to push for real and lasting change and to advance reproductive health rights and justice. As we begin this conversation, we must acknowledge that we do this work for justice within context of great injustice throughout history. We do this to work on land that has been stolen from the indigenous people in a country built by enslaved and oppressed people. If you do not know to whom the land you live on belongs, please visit native-land.ca. As we reckon with the violence upon Indigenous people with the recent conversations around the genocide perpetuated at residential schools, as we continue to reckon with the racial injustice that we must do more than simply acknowledge. We must act to dismantle white supremacy, to support Indigenous-led grassroots change and Black-led movements and campaigns. We must, as the saying goes, be the change. We are excited to continue our partnership with the Louisiana Coalition for Reproductive Freedom. All summer, we have been bringing together leaders from across the country to discuss groundbreaking programs and policies. Lessons learned in our work in advancing reproductive health rights and justice, and of course, share resources and ways to get involved. Today, we're looking at a topic that to some may find embarrassing, a little scandalous. We're talking about sex. In our work to advance reproductive rights, we often avoid a pretty big part of leading empowered lives. We don't talk about sex. We don't talk about relationships, at least not enough. We talk about people facing unintended pregnancies and avoid discussions about the complexities of sexual relationships or the needs that people have to be informed and supported in their sex lives. This is particularly true when it comes to certain people and communities. So today we're talking about it, and I'm excited. We need to stop the stigma. We need to own our rights and our need for pleasure and relationships. This includes making sure that we do not make the lives, needs, and desires of people with disabilities invisible. In my life and in my work, I see it time and time again. People with disabilities are treated as if they were not sexual beings, and that is completely false. This is not just insulting, but it is also dangerous. Being denied basic information and support is pretty harmful, and it brings some harmful consequences. People with different disabilities may face different challenges and have very different needs. Some disabilities may put people at higher risk for crimes like sexual assault or abuse. Someone who needs regular assistance may rely on a person who is abusing them for care, a common factor in elder abuse. The perpetrator may use this power to threaten, to coerce, or to force someone into non-consensual sex or sexual activities. An abuser may take away access to the tools that a person with a disability needs to communicate, to move, such as computers, phones, wheelchairs, canes, walkers, whatever it is that that person needs. People with disabilities may be less likely to be taken serious when they make a report of sexual assault or abuse. They may also face challenges in accessing services to make the report in the first place. For example, someone who is deaf or deafblind may face challenges accessing communication tools like a phone to report the crime or to get help. Many people with disabilities may not intend or lack information about healthy sexuality and the types of touching that are appropriate or inappropriate. This can be especially challenging if a person with a disability requires other people to touch them to provide care. This makes ensuring access to comprehensive, compassionate sex education in all schools and educational settings, as well as a training for health professionals to make sure that they know how to and what they need to do affirmatively when talking to young people with disabilities, and really people of all ages. This just doesn't go for young people, about their sexual and reproductive health needs and the questions and issue of safety, as well as dignity and empowerment. People with disabilities should be counseled and educated about STI testing, resources on safer sex practices for all sexual identities, including LGBTQ folks, birth control and vaccination against STIs beginning in adolescence. But safe sex and contraceptions are not the only sexual and reproductive health needs of disabled people. As we go through life, we ask the same questions and should be given information and support about whether or not we would like to be ready to be parents. We may need to seek abortion care and need clinics and providers to understand the capable and be capable of meeting our needs. This goes for disabled people as well. We may want to become pregnant. Gynecologists should talk to disabled people about plans for pregnancy and families and any particular preconception needs that they might have. Or that, even me. Many people with disability face some pretty big misinformation, assumptions, and even stigma around the desire or ability to carry a pregnancy or raise children. And in the state of Rhode Island, we know that children are being taken away from parents who are disabled. So we should be able to seek our health professionals to help support us in finding the information we need to consider our parenting options without encountering bias and fear mongering because of the assumptions that others have about our ability to parent. This also comes to hospital or birthing center staffs who may not have any training on meeting our needs, safety net, and health insurance providers who do not know how to support parents with disabilities or even hostile to our families. So there is still many laws on the book that threaten the rights of parents with disabilities, including in our state. This is an attack on our reproductive rights and in the important reproductive justice issues that we are always working on. The fact is that there is a lot of work to be done to include the needs of people with disabilities and especially the voices and experiences. Making sure that we acknowledge this, name this, and begin specifically and intentionally addressing some of these basic reproductive and sexual health needs of the disability community, and what we build partnerships with organizations specifically working on disability justice issues is an important step. Let's be frank, people who do not want abortion to be legal or to have sex ed in the classrooms are trying to put a wedge between abortion access. And the disability community are taking advantage of the issue to engage the intersection of disability and abortion and reproductive rights. So that gap of filling in people with disabilities in our reproductive justice work is really not helpful. It is harmful to our work. So look at all the bills that in recent years that have been pushed around access, abortion, and fetal diagnosis throughout the country. These laws are not really about the dignity of people with disabilities or our community. They are about slowly taking away all access to abortions. But if we aren't talking and we aren't collaborating or trying to bring these issues of reproductive health, rights, and justice movement to build partnerships with disability activists or groups, then we're leaving the field wide open for people with disabilities to be used as pawns in the anti-abortion goals and agenda. So avoiding talking about sex doesn't stop politicians from trying to limit how we live our lives or build our families or the choices we make about our bodies. We may not always get it right, and we won't. Politics, it's activism, but we must be there for the movement. We must keep trying, and we have to keep representing and respecting the voices, the lives, and the experiences of everyone. That means we can't ignore groups of people because of the discussion are too complex, too tough, too unknown. So we certainly see this time and again when it comes to young people and their voices and needs being left out of the conversation. So let's start with our panelists. And I thank you all for hearing my really long speech. But let's get started with some of our amazing panelists today. The first person I want to get on board is Monica Edwards from Urge. How are you, Monica?
I'm good. How are you, Stephanie?
Oh, you know, I'm living life right now.
Living in the panoramic.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We're so happy to have you here today, and I'm really excited to get to know you a little bit. Also, get to know a little bit of the work that you're doing and bringing this to our, the Womxn Project and to our communities here across all this intersectional work that we are doing. So let's get started. Let's know a little bit about you, Monica, and then we can get going with the questions.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. As Stephanie said, my name is Monica. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Federal Policy Manager at Urge, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. Urge is a young people's reproductive justice organization that does federal policy work, as well as works in 6 states, primarily in the South and the Midwest. Those states are Kansas, Georgia, Texas, Ohio, Alabama, and which is my home state, and then also California as well. And so, yeah, I'm a young person from Alabama. I was born and raised in Alabama, and I'm currently in the DC area right now.
Oh, lucky. I love DC. Wild out there.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay, so let's start by asking you this. Could you talk about how, as a movement, we ignore or even stigmatize the sexual health, what the needs and the liberation of people are, of young people specifically are?
Of course. And if I'm looking down, it's because I'm looking at notes. FYI.
Go for it. Don't worry. We all have to look at notes.
Yeah, but I think also if I'm talking too fast, let me know. I talk fast.
Oh, okay.
But I think as a movement, as reproductive health rights and justice advocates, and as a movement, we often talk about personal and bodily autonomy, and we often talk about self-determination. But in that messaging and creating those messaging talking points or just having those discussions, we either stigmatize young people or leave them out of the discussion completely, which is, as you pointed out, Stephanie, harmful. And that's despite the fact that we know and history has shown us that young people have led pretty much every major movement for social and political change in our country. So young people have been doing the work and will continue doing the work, yet when we have these conversations as a movement and we talk about policy change and implementing social change, we often leave young people out of the conversation or stigmatize them or don't make them feel empowered enough to speak up and speak out in our spaces. And that's harmful. And to be clear, when I say young people, I mean young people under 18, as well as young people between 18 and 30. So like from sexual to domestic violence or intimate partner violence, from abortion restrictions to a lack of sex ed or inaccurate sex education, to homophobia, transphobia, I could keep going. Young people are uniquely impacted by these issues, specifically young people of color and specifically young people who are LGBTQIA+. And so young people face barriers, for example, like with abortion, parental involvement laws, which require young people under 18 to involve a parent or guardian in abortion decisions, despite the fact that in certain situations that might not be like available to them, or it might not be safe for them. And then if you're like me, I grew up in Alabama. And so in some places in Alabama, there is really great sex education. Unfortunately for me, the sex education I received was pretty much identical to the Mean Girl scene where he said, don't have sex because you'll get pregnant and die. That was the sex education I received, right? And you have like across the country, young people who are either getting great sex ed, young people who are getting no sex ed at all, or young people who are getting not only inaccurate sex education, but extremely harmful sex education, right? And so we have all these issues that are uniquely impacting young people and their sexual and reproductive health and rights, yet we don't talk about it. So I think as a movement, we have to do better about being inclusive and making sure that our spaces are safe for young people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I agree. I think that sexual education is really important. And Rhode Island too, we don't have the greatest sexual education program here. And for students who are disabled, they get removed from the health education portion most often here, at least in Rhode Island. So they don't really get to engage and to learn the little that they're teaching the students. So they get nothing. So I do agree that it's an important part of students, and not putting them there, it's harmful as well. So what are some of the barriers young people face to having a healthy sex life and making their own decisions about their bodies and relationships?
I mean, definitely what we just talked about, sex education. I'm a big sex ed fan, probably because mine was horrible. And I'm like, I don't want people to get that ever. It's just that it's so important for young people in order to make, like, a part of being able to make informed decisions about our lives, we need accurate information, and we need to be able to feel safe to do so. URGE uses the reproductive justice framework, which was started and led by Black women. And reproductive justice is about being able to live and thrive and make personal decisions, informed decisions in safe and sustainable communities, right? And you can't make informed decisions in safe, sustainable communities when you don't have the information needed to make those decisions, or you don't feel safe to make those decisions, right? And so I definitely think sex ed is one of the top ones that young people face as far as the barriers. Also abortion. Like, we talk about abortion as this issue that's very cisgendered. We don't talk about abortion in a way that is inclusive of queer and trans folks, and that's harmful. And we know, like, younger generations, there are so many young people who are identifying as LGBTQIA+. And we also don't talk about abortion in the context of racial justice, right? And so we think about all these, the spotlight on police brutality, we think about the spotlight on anti-Asian violence, right? We don't have those conversations when talking about abortion and reproductive health rights and justice, right? And that's a barrier, because young people need to be able to feel safe in our spaces to make these decisions. And so I just think we need to do better about talking about issues and making sure that we're talking about them in a way that young people not only feel included in talking about those things and the barriers that they face, but they feel safe to do so.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's really insightful and really important for people in the, in the world of activism, to understand that just because you're young doesn't mean that you can't be actively voicing your needs, and particularly being inserted into the center so that they can discuss what is important to them and why they need such help and elevation in terms of, like, what reproductive health is for them. What are some of the ways that URGE is working to change the conversation and make a positive change in this work that you're doing?
Well, as I said, I'm the federal policy manager at URGE. So a lot of the work that I do is, like, working on our proactive legislative priorities, like passing the Each Woman Act, which is about getting rid of the Hyde Amendment. Shout out to our friends at All Above All. As well as working on REA, which is the federal bill about sex education. It's called the Real Education and Access for Healthy Youth Act. As well as, like, other federal priority bills. But I do not want to spend this last part talking about me, because I give all the credit and utmost respect at URGE to our communications manager, hi Kiki, to our state policy directors and our state organizers and coordinators, because they're the folks who are on the ground with our young people, or who are taking the messages and the priorities that our young people have and turning it into like digestible messaging for social media, right? And I think that's important, is to make sure that our organizations and our movements are really led from the ground up rather than like a top down type of thing. So I really give all the kudos to our folks on the ground and our young people. Like, for example, I remember not too long ago in the movement, like we were very pro-choice narrative when talking about abortion. And it's young people who have come in and said, no, not pro-choice, pro-abortion. And no stigma on how many abortions people get. Oh, and by the way, get rid of respectability politics. And oh, by the way, we need to get rid of Hyde, right? And we've just seen this shift of like messaging and the way we talk about abortion. And I give all the credit to Urge's young people, our staff on the ground, and young people across the country.
Young people are powerful, and I hope that this conversation really brings that out, and get more people to understand that just because you've been around for 40 years doesn't mean that new voices can't come and really create the change that is needed. Because if in 40 years we haven't been able to do a lot, then maybe this new generation can. And at least that's what they're looking like they're doing, because a lot has been going on, and I'm very, very excited for the work that you guys do. There's incredible stigma on sex work, and this isn't just a wrong to building a movement, but that is truly about bodily autonomy that allows for justice and pleasure, but also it is harmful impact on individuals that have that are sex workers. So you know, I want to thank you so much to Monica for her great conversation. But now, you know, we have a great woman that's here in Rhode Island. Her name is Bella Robinson, and she's going to talk a little bit about herself. But you know, right now she is leading a lot of work within the sex work activism, and I'm really excited to have her talk here today. So let's hear it from Miss Bella Robinson. And can you introduce yourself a little bit, just so people that don't know you, which is probably not many, but those who don't, can hear from you and know a little bit about the work you do and who you are.
Sure. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I haven't seen you since before the pandemic started.
I know, it's been so long.
So I'm Bella Robinson. I'm the executive director and founder of Coyote RI, which stands for Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics. We do have a long-term history in Rhode Island from when Margot St. James ran Coyote. So in 1979, all prostitution in Rhode Island was a felony, and she sued the state with Coyote versus Roberts, which led to the loophole of indoor sex work being decriminalized. So I actually got to work under decrim when I first got to Rhode Island for about 6 months. And over the last 10 years, I've worked under criminalization and also organized under criminalization. So I think about what it was like for women that were organizing for reproductive rights before Roe versus Wade. So in that context, we also do a lot of policy work. We've done the research. I'm a certified HIV counselor, test counselor in Rhode Island. We work with a lot of populations and advocate for trans women, LGBT, youth, poor women, undocumented women. So our narratives become bigger and bigger. You know, we're fighting poverty and for 15 an hour, Medicaid for all. And there's a huge amount of sex workers that are disabled that live on $600 or $700 a month that supplement their income. We also have a lot of sex workers that have day jobs, but you know, they like to be able to pay the rent, eat, and feed their kids. So we also just passed H5250, which we are the first state to get a legislation committee to study, revise, and commercial sex laws that guarantees sex workers seats on this commission. And one of the things that we've been doing is pulling a lot of public records and charging documents, and found an interesting case from 2016 when the police claim the neighbors called, they found her back page ad, they set up a date, they arrest her, and she says, I'm gonna beat the charge. They reported her arrest to DCYF, even though her children were with her sister. So you think about how evil, so it's kind of the same thing as attacking, people with disabilities and trying to take their children away. So when we talk about sex education, which I agree we need more, I believe there's only 22 states that are allowed to do it. And sometimes they can't even put the condom on the banana for, sex education is science. Your beliefs and values are learned at home and in church. But this even takes us back to our history. I suggest everyone Google the book, The Trials of Nina McCall, that in 1920, the health inspector could grab any girl or woman off the street, probe her vagina, even though there wasn't a test, claim she had a disease, and put her in an institute and treat her with mercury and arsenic. And women of color were still segregated from the white women in these institutes. So, we have a long history of this. And while I'm totally okay with someone being pro-life as their personal choice, I'm just not okay when they want to criminalize other people. And then, in this right now in the pandemic, you have to wonder, did they really care about babies and kids? They won't even wear a mask. But let you ask me some questions, Stephanie.
Oh my God. Well, the work that you have been doing is incredible. I've been following your work, as you know, so I'm really excited to hear some of those, answers to these questions that we have. First one is, there's a lot of myths and misinformation about sex work and decriminalization. Talk to us about what that really means and why is it important?
Okay. Well, first I'm going to tell you about the 4 different models. Legalization is like in the Nevada brothels, where you have to get a sheriff's card, do a fingerprint background check, not have a criminal record. You have to be tested weekly by their doctor, live at the brothel. You're not allowed to leave. You have to pay for all of this. And then you have to fork over half your earnings to the brothel and then pay taxes. Well, if other people want to do it, great. But in Rhode Island under Decrim, sex workers could work from home, hotels, for escort agencies, for spas, as long as they weren't on the street, they weren't criminalized. And I don't believe street-based workers should be criminalized because they're the most vulnerable of us of all. So this narrative is very similar to what pro-lifers have done over reproductive rights. We've heard the hysterias and this misinformation that all these women are having late-term abortions when it rarely happens. And it's usually because of a medical reason, right? And, the sex trafficking narrative has been funded by Congress since around 2000. In 2015, Congress gave $687 million to any nonprofit that would, one, create awareness about trafficking and hold public trainings on how to spot it, asking the public to be vigilantes and call the police on sex workers. Now, we're living in a time where most of us are down with defund the police and understand the police are racist and murdering Black people in the street. But for some reason, they still think that this is a good idea to send these violent predatory cops after vulnerable women. Now, we've learned, you would think that we learned something from the Georgia spa murders last year, but we didn't. Just in June, Homeland Security did a raid on 6 Cranston spas. These weren't places that had big signs that said spas. They stalked them on the internet on review sites and printed their names and addresses in the media so racist people could go murder them. So let's talk about trafficking now. I think most of us agree that it's not okay to be a sex worker if you're a minor. Okay, I don't want the minors to be in trouble, but I think we can all understand that's just not appropriate. John Jay College did a great report a few years ago. They got $1 million from DOJ. They went to 6 US cities and they interviewed 1,000 youth who were between 13 and 24 years old. 97% of these youths reported that they didn't have pimps and market facilitators, that they taught each other how to find clients and avoid cops and social workers because they couldn't even access shelter or other vital services because of mandatory reporting laws. So if a 17-year-old shows up at Crossroads, by law, they have to report them to DCYF within 24 hours. Now let's talk about DCYF and all the kids that died in state care and the $1 million lawsuit and the other kid died. And, you know, foster care in Rhode Island has been privatized by a nonprofit called Communities for the People. These kids are being placed in homes or facilities with staff members that work 8 hours at a time. How do you parent a kid 8 hours at a time? Why aren't these kids being placed in a foster home as part of someone's family, which is what they deserve? So it's easier, you know, and then ask yourself that most of the SPA women were in their 50s or 60s. Homeland ICE also rated SPAs in Pawtucket in 2019. How does harassing 50 or 60-year-old SPA women help our youth? Maybe we should be investing in LGBT halfway houses and youth drop-in centers and revise some of these mandatory reporting laws that seem to be hurting youth and other vulnerable populations. That's a lot.
Wow, there's a lot. That's a lot. But that, you know, I really do agree with you in the whole aspect of youth being put in DCYF and how harmful that is, and how wonderful it would be that we can actually have halfway homes or homes where we can put youth where they feel safe. You know, safety is the key, but I really do appreciate that information. It's really great.
Let me tell you one more thing though. I get that, you know, to support sex workers' rights doesn't mean that you approve of it. It just simply means that you recognize abusing this population is not okay.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
furthermore, when it comes to medical health, every woman has the right to be honest with their doctor about what they're doing and ask questions about their body. So we've also did a bunch of research. We created 3 continuing medical education modules. I'm going to put the link in the chat.
Yes,
it's a great way to start these conversations. So thank you so much for inviting me and having me.
Oh, we have more questions though.
That's okay.
I want to get a lot out of you. It isn't just about laws, it's also about changing the way people in our movement think and talk about sex work. And actually making sure that we do talk about sex work, because I think oftentimes we kind of forget that aspect when we talk about activism in reproductive health. It's kind of this taboo that we like, no, we can't talk about that. But it's important. So this makes it hard for people to see the support or care, including from health professionals, like, you know, like Bella simply just kind of pulled out. What is Coyote doing to ensure competence among the health professionals, especially since we see that there's a lot of discrimination, that you can say, in the health system for various people, whether it's LGBTQ community members, disabled members, and sex workers, amongst others. So, you know, Black women are all included in that discrimination process in the health system. But in the line of work of sex work, what is Coyote doing to ensure competence among health professionals?
Well, that's why we made the CME modules. And it actually starts that if you're a physician or a medical provider and you can't get past your judgment and your stigma, please just refer this patient to someone else and don't further traumatize them. We would like to develop one for mental health workers, because we know a lot of sex workers that have been fired from their therapist after they disclosed they were a sex worker, even if they did legal sex work like cam work or were a stripper. So if I have anxiety, they're going to tell me it's because I'm a sex worker. I don't have post-traumatic stress because of my clients. I have post-traumatic stress from being incarcerated, going to prison, being abused, by taking on all the hostility and hatred from society and so forth. And an interesting fact is we did survey 1,500 sex workers across the country in 2017 with 145 questions. Only 36% of them identified as heterosexual. So there's a huge amount of LGBT group. And in local organizing, when I went to a lot of coalition meetings, people would come up to me and say, I used to do sex work, or my sister used to do sex work, but I'm scared to even tell my own org. because of the stigma. So, and then think about if you're trans and you're a Black trans woman, then you add sex worker, and then or if you're, LGBT, you add all these other layers on top of that. We also think that it's very important that medical and healthcare, mental health providers are not trying to force someone to exit when they don't have the resources to help you pay the rent or feed your kids or anything else. But lastly, I want to talk about levels of empowerment because there is a big scope. I used to be a street-based worker. I started at age 18 and got my first arrest 2 weeks after I turned 18, which kind of sealed my fate in life. And it was like, well, why go to college now? I can't have a career. So you have street-based workers that can't negotiate for condom use or for higher rates, okay? You have people with disabilities, people with substance abuse, people with mental health issues. You also have online workers that are legal or dancers that are legal. So there is a hierarchy. They think they're better than us sometimes. You also have online escorts who can be charging anywhere from $100 to $1,000 an hour. So the more poor you are, the less resources, the less community support, the easier it is for me to abuse and exploit you. And when you criminalize someone, they can't come forward and report it without being threatened with arrest or stalked or harassed by law enforcement. You kind of give all the power to the predators. And part of me thinks that the government just wants sex workers to die. They don't want us to be safer. They don't want to lift us out of poverty. And I don't believe, could you imagine if we went out in public and arrested every woman that had a bruise on her or a black eye to save her from domestic violence? So you can't say sex work causes trafficking, because that would be like saying marriage causes domestic violence. So these again are misinformation. They repeat it with the government funding in the media decade after decade until sadly half of society is kind of brainwashed like QAnon.
Yeah. Wow. What are the actions you would like to see because of what you just said? What are the actions that you think is important for you to see reproductive health rights and justice groups take to ensure they do not leave sex workers behind?
That is a great question. Because a year or so ago, someone reached out from one of the rape crisis centers in Boston, and he wanted to know how to help sex workers. And, I gave him the continuing medical education. They allowed him to start using it in some of the training, but I pointed out your website says you do not discriminate against LGBT or based on race or sexuality. Why doesn't it say we don't discriminate against sex workers? So I think that would, and that's one of our future goals, is to go all around the country and shame people that refuse to put this disclaimer on their website.
Noted, duly noted.
And even locally, I've had to go around and vet these orgs that are getting funded by that federal money. A lot of them were around 30 years ago doing great work before the trafficking narrative, but they're on the trafficking task force and they profit off our criminalization and our arrest. And then they parade a victim around and say how they saved her because they got her in a part. But, it's really another form of oppression. And I certainly wouldn't take government money to throw reproductive rights under the bus, but I think we need to have this push. We live in Rhode Island. Separation of church and state is very important, especially in Rhode Island with Roger Williams' history. So this idea that, it's not about the baker and the cake. A couple hundred years ago, the king cut your head off if you were the wrong religion. Nobody, when you go to Stop and Shop or go to work, no one cares what religion you are or what Bible you read, unless you're Muslim in the United States. I will make that exception. But pretty much we're free to believe in what we want. So why do we let the government use this as an excuse that, these nonprofit religious organizations don't want their health care to provide birth control? It's none of your job's business what's on your health care or what health concerns you have. So I think we have to make pushbacks on that. And even after we get decriminalized, we're going to still need discrimination legislation, hate crime legislation. Sex workers are not even included in hate crime legislation. And when I think about the Georgia spas, the secondary factor was race. The first factor in their deaths was horophobia, and the media just erased that. And I understand they like to be identified as spa workers because, you know, they have so many different layers of stigma attached to them. And they are being hunted along with sex workers. We have Homeland, the FBI, ICE, partnering with local law enforcement, traveling the country, spending trillions of dollars to do prostitution stings. And rarely do they find a victim. Our estimation is less than 2% of people involved in the sex industry are underage or trafficked.
I just want to, I'm so proud to know you and the work that you do. I really am. When advocates talk about sex, it's often pretty focused on pregnancy. And that's an important conversation, but it ignores so much about sex in our lives. And it is often done in a way that focuses on cisgender, straight people. This erases queer and trans folks from the conversation. Reproductive health rights and justice and the LGBTQ movement are inseparable. We're all working for the right to choose who and how we love and how we use our bodies. Like I mentioned before in my opening, it's important for everyone in the LGBT community. It's not going to be removed from that conversation. So without government, employers, or harmful religious intrusion, we want to see the LGBT community grow and really, you know, have their rights be put into the center and moved into the right direction. The National LGBTQ Task Force is working to make sure that we do not forget this. And we are excited to hear from Taissa Morimoto, and I hope I said this right. Oh my God, the way I don't know how to pronounce, sometimes people's names are horrible, about the efforts of the queer reproductive health justice. Taissa, I would love for you to introduce yourself, and if you can pronounce your name again so that I say it correctly moving forward. And folks in the comments can as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. Yeah, Taissa Morimoto, I, she, and they pronouns. I work at the National LGBTQ Task Force, where we work to advance full freedom, justice, and equality for LGBTQ people. And we work to build a future where everyone is free to be themselves in every aspect of their lives. So thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. You know, this is a really, really, really great group of people, and I'm like so excited about your conversation here too. The LGBT community is huge here in Rhode Island, like it is around the country, and for me, it's important to be able to bring the community together and really work with the Womxn Project and with all these organizations and bring light to what reproductive justice means to the community. So with that, I do have to ask, why should LGBTQ people care about reproductive health and rights?
Yeah, LGBTQ people should care about reproductive health rights and justice because LGBTQ folks need access to reproductive health care. LGBTQ communities disproportionately live in poverty, face unique barriers to accessing healthcare, including being more likely to be uninsured or underinsured, and experience discrimination in healthcare settings. Our communities need access to contraception, abortion, assisted reproductive services, HIV care, so many other services, and we need and deserve culturally competent healthcare providers. We need and deserve patient-centered, compassionate care, and the knowledge to make informed decisions. And so when I think about this question, I just think that, you know, how could LGBTQ people not care about repro health? We can't afford not to. And reproductive health care and having access to it is essential to being able to live a full, abundant life. And the same folks who attack repro justice are sometimes the same folks who attack LGBTQ rights and liberation. The same folks who control sexuality and gender expression usually share an agenda with controlling reproductive choices. There's been historical alignment between these two movements, and we continue to see attacks on both of them. And I think it's important for our communities to understand how LGBTQ folks in many ways are disproportionately impacted and have a lot of different types of negative health outcomes because of the barriers and because of the lack of access to the reproductive health services.
Thank you for that. Can you tell us a little bit about the law, the courts, and the rights of privacy as it pertains to LGBT and repro rights?
Yes, this might be a little policy wonky. So the reproductive
It's okay,
rights
I love it,
and
bring it.
the reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights movements have kind of intertwined legal histories with many parallels in both of our movements' fight for fundamental freedoms. Court cases in these movements are often decided and defined by two different legal concepts, one being the Equal Protection Clause and the other the right to privacy. So the right to privacy protects individuals against government intrusion in intimate personal decisions and activities. So this includes sexual activity and medical information, for example. And the right to privacy is not explicitly written in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has consistently held that it guarantees this fundamental right. And so the recognition of privacy as a constitutional right has been upheld in many different repro cases leading up to and including Roe v. Wade, in which the court affirmed the constitutional right to access safe and legal abortion. It affirmed that the decision to continue a pregnancy or to have an abortion, which impacts a person's body and health, belongs to the individual and not the government. And the court, however, has been more resistant to applying this right to privacy in the context of relationships among LGBTQ people. It was only in the 2003 Lawrence v. Texas case that the Supreme Court extended this right to privacy in intimate consensual sexual activity. And the 2015 Obergefell case, which held that same-sex couples have the fundamental right to marry, also relied in part on this right to privacy. And this was only possible because of the groundwork of cases and the precedent developed and set in earlier legal rights and LGBTQ rights cases.
Thank you. That's very insightful. I think it's good information for the community to know and for us as well. I do want to say, if you can just put your voice a little higher
Yes.
for us, that would be great. I know it's hard because sometimes I have a soft voice too sometimes, so I try to like pitch it a little higher. All right, so the next question I think is it's also very important, and it's let's be frank, because this is what we want to be. We want to be as frank as possible in this conversation. The same people who attack LGBT, like you mentioned, are people who are trying to take away the rights of abortion and bodily autonomy and the right to have family as an LGBT partnership. What are some of the specific laws and policies that limit LGBT people's freedoms, and especially when it comes to reproductive health and rights?
Yeah, I think what's important to remember throughout this conversation is that any limit to LGBTQ rights is a limit on reproductive rights and justice. And any limit on reproductive health and rights is a limit on LGBTQ liberation, because reproductive rights are LGBTQ rights, abortion rights are LGBTQ rights, rights to access healthcare are LGBTQ rights. We all live intersectional lives where our identities are perceived in different ways, and sometimes people who hold certain identities might face tremendous discrimination or barriers to healthcare simply because of those identities. And our work isn't done until all people have reproductive freedom. And so I start with that just to acknowledge that many of the laws and policies may not explicitly limit LGBTQ people's freedoms, but in effect, that's exactly what they do. So for a while now, anti-abortion legislators have tried to make abortion impossible to access. And one of their most effective tactics has been banning insurance coverage of abortion services in government healthcare programs. This puts abortion financially out of reach for many people and significantly impacts LGBTQ people who are more likely than non-LGBTQ people to be living in poverty and to be uninsured or underinsured. The Hyde Amendment is one of the oldest restrictions directly targeting low-income people's ability to obtain an abortion. And this amendment is a legislative policy included in kind of the annual federal budget bill that withholds abortion coverage from those qualified and enrolled in Medicaid. And so it's not a permanent law, but it's been attached annually to congressional appropriation bills and has been approved every year by Congress since 1976, which was just 3 years after Roe v. Wade was decided. And so the Hyde Amendment is one type of amendment that passes in appropriation bills. And these are commonly used legislative tools to facilitate anti-abortion policies that prevent many people, especially poor people, people who are incarcerated, immigrants, people of color, from accessing vital services through the federal government. And so appropriation bills are part of the budgeting and spending process. There are different subcommittees that draft and vote on separate bills to allocate funds for different government functions. And so these bills can often include amendments or policy writers. And some of these policy writers restrict access to abortion and have been doing so annually since Roe v. Wade was decided. And then there are also target regulations of abortion providers, which are also known as trap laws, which are a class of abortion restrictions that burden providers with requirements regarding their facility, their staffing, and equipment. So these trap laws are passed under this facade of safety and protecting women's health, but they have little or no benefit on patients, and they make it harder for these facilities to adhere to these onerous requirements. And so ultimately, these laws endanger patients by reducing the total number of abortion facilities that are able to stay open because of these financial and administrative constraints, therefore making safe services harder to obtain. And I'll just close by saying that on the state level, dozens of states have either passed or are preparing anti-trans sports bans and bans on gender-affirming healthcare for young transgender people, non-binary people. And so these attacks just continue to come at us from all different fronts.
So what are the actions that you want to see people make so that you can see more of a difference moving forward?
Yeah, I think one big thing on our radar is there's going to be, a big fight in the Supreme Court in the next year that could potentially overturn parts of this decision in Roe v. Wade. And the lawsuit challenges legal restrictions in Mississippi that place burdens on people seeking abortion services. And this includes laws that demean, delay, and misinform people. And it also includes a series of trap laws. And so this will be the first time the court will rule on a constitutionality of a pre-viability abortion ban since Roe, or in nearly 50 years. And I think it'll be vital to stay plugged into organizations like the ones represented on this panel, into other local, state, and national repro orgs to take actions when they're needed and to continue to raise our voices against the possibility of these restrictions on our reproductive freedoms.
Thank you so much. I think my next question really is, like, you kind of touched on it, but what suggestions do you have for advocates to make sure that they too are fearing RJ, including in the needs of the LGBTQ community? Because one thing is having people advocate for it, but another is having organizations really invest their time and energy and bringing that into the core of their programs. So what do you suggest activists should do, advocates should do?
Yeah, people who identify as LGBTQ including cis women, trans men, two-spirit, intersex, non-binary, gender non-conforming people, etc., can get pregnant and rely on a full range of health services to be their whole selves. And restrictions on abortion and birth control undermine LGBTQ people's ability to make important, intimate decisions. And it further undermines the fundamental right to have full control over our lives and bodies. And so I just think we need to continue to center the needs and voices of people who are most affected by these issues and approach our work by listening, by being compassionate, and by supporting communities on their own terms.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the insightful conversation we had and you being here. The attempts to try to control who we love or how we build our lives, the healthcare we seek, and the decisions we make about our futures are not just happening in the United States. There is a global agenda to undermine our reproductive health rights, and it falls especially hard on Black and Brown women, girls, and gender expensive people. Jina Dhillon from IPAS is with us to talk about the efforts to ensure global reproductive justice and make sure that we look beyond borders in our work to make sure people can have a healthy, empowered sex lives that they want and to build the futures and the families that is best for them. I think this is really big because for me, I'm excited to hear because for me, it's really important to look at the international and global space. I've done that a lot within the Womxn Project when we did Ireland, when Argentina happened, and when other countries were working on that. So it's very exciting to have you here, Jina. And I would love it for you to introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can go ahead and ask some questions.
Thank you. As you said, my name is Jina Dhillon, and I work with IPAS. We are a global NGO working to address the harms of unsafe abortion. We know it's a human rights violation to deny access to sexual and reproductive health, and abortion is included in that, and that drives everything that we do. And I really appreciate you all for having a global perspective on this stage. And I just have to acknowledge, maybe before we get started, thinking globally, the catastrophic levels of human suffering that we're seeing across the world right now. We are here right now, but we are also with the people of Afghanistan, of Haiti, all of the people who are experiencing extreme devastation on multiple levels in their lives right now. It's on our minds. As I said, we work on abortion access in some of the most restrictive settings in the world, but these are also the same settings where people are experiencing other rights violations. And we work on abortion because abortion tells us about what level of reproductive autonomy people have, what levels of reproductive oppression are happening, but it is just one of the many issues that people are facing and the challenges that they're trying to overcome in their lives, as it is true here in the United States as well. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have you. So first question is, could you talk about how U.S. policy negatively impacts reproductive rights around the world?
Well, so, everything that we've heard in terms of the barriers and the challenges today, it applies globally. We restricts the bodily autonomy of people based on who they are. The US is not the only place where this happens. It happens everywhere. But you asked specifically the harm that the US is doing. And so, historically, when you think about abortion, it is and has been a taboo here everywhere. It's also been a really effective political tool. We've used it here domestically to control and kind of undermine freedoms of many bodies, especially Black and brown bodies. And we also do that globally. So I'll mention foreign aid as being kind of the best example of this. We are one of the richest countries in the world. We are a generous aid donor to countries that rely on aid in order to global financial aid to address real problems of poverty, health, economic empowerment, safety, et cetera. But we do something really dangerous when we distribute foreign aid. And we just heard the example here of what we do domestically with the Hyde Amendment. We restrict access to abortion for anyone who's receiving that aid. So what we do globally is we reach into the health and development programs that are serving Black and brown people around the world on things like sexual and reproductive health, malaria, TB, education programs, addressing gender-based violence, economic empowerment. And we inject those programs with a conservative political agenda. And it's that same agenda that we know is responsible for the reproductive repression of so many Black and brown bodies in this country. And that agenda, basically, as we heard, is, we believe abortion is bad. Therefore, if you do any work on abortion, you will be you will lose your US funding, which, in places where people truly do want to address this issue, that alone can make them stop working on addressing access to abortion in their context because they need that funding for other programs. So specifically, you may have heard of the global gag rule, or also known as the Mexico City policy. The official name was protecting life in global health. And so you can see right there the agenda that we're pushing, and it affects all global health aid recipients, anyone who gets global health funding, even their non-US money. So not just what they get from the US, but if they get money from other places, they can't even use that money to do any kind of increasing access to information on abortion, providing services, or even advocating to reduce restrictions in the law. And the gag rule kind of comes and goes depending on who's in office. So it moves with the political winds. But what happens, so right now, even though it's been repealed, what still is true because of the gag rule is that abortion is siloed out. So globally, global health programs think of abortion as this other thing that sometimes we can work on it, sometimes we can't, sometimes our funding is in jeopardy. So that alone, separating this out as if it's something different, that it's not relevant to the whole experience of people's reproductive health and well-being, is a problem. And we also do that with the Helms Amendment, which is a US law. It affects all foreign aid, and it's interpreted extremely restrictively to basically deny any recipients of foreign aid, US foreign aid, to do any kind of work or counsel on abortion care.
Wow. So a lot of information that some of us might not be aware of, and I really appreciate you telling us.
Mm-hmm.
What are some ways that the reproductive health and sexual rights of women are limited globally?
There are, like I said, there's so many intersecting factors. So when it comes to sexual and reproductive health, we focus on access to abortion. Abortion can be extremely restricted. It can be completely banned. Even in places where it's legal, we often see that communities or systems are not necessarily interpreting the law as being legal, even in certain cases. So we still see challenges with getting access. People, we talked about access to comprehensive sexuality education. That is a major gap globally as well. So, young people, aren't able to get the information easily, or they have to kind of rely on other networks, if they have it, to get information about their bodies and how to kind of take care of themselves as they want to. So that is a major challenge, and something that we work on as well. And other issues, gender-based violence. I mean, we know that women's bodies are often a casualty of conflict zones and just kind of at increased risk in humanitarian settings. So this is something that's just ever present in the work that we do. Early and forced child marriages, you know, we could probably spend all day talking about how all of these issues layer and create kind of a picture of reproductive oppression that looks very different depending on where you are. But it's, you know, it's still the same oppression.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. What are the specific policies IPAS and partners are advancing to make a difference?
I'm glad you asked, because I mentioned these two terrible policies, but and I think we've already heard about some good news on the domestic front. Globally, we're also really excited that moving through Congress right now are two pieces of legislation that could permanently repeal both the global gag rule and the Helms Amendment. So I'm talking about the Global HER Act, which is health empowerment and rights, and partners in DC and across the country are kind of doing some amazing organizing to put a spotlight on the gag rule and permanently repealing that. The Abortion is Healthcare Everywhere Act is also moving through Congress, and this is a permanent repeal on Helms. So there are these opportunities right now, and you know, it's important to keep a feminist gaze on the US, not just what we're doing here, but what we're doing globally, because you know, it's your interests that are being purportedly represented. So you know, if you want your interests to look like the gag rule or repealing the gag rule, you know, we have to advocate for that. Women in India and Malawi, they're not going to advocate for that. It has to be us.
Yeah, 100%. How can people in the US, advocates that are constantly working on issues domestically, but also are interested in the global aspect of what reproductive justice is, get involved in the work that you're doing and gradually make an impact on it? What can they do?
You know, this, like I said, thank you for having this global perspective on the panel, because I think this is an important piece of it, just including, many of you mentioned that when the issue is missing, it's a problem. And when this issue is missing from the discussion, you know, the conversation isn't whole. And I think, you know, bringing yourself into this conversation, now that you know there are pieces of legislation out there, you can do some research and just call your representatives when it's time, and, you know, do what you need to do. But just remember that the US is a major actor and player on the global stage, and that means that we can and do, you know, inject our political views onto people. And if we pay attention to what that looks like, we see that it's the same thing we're fighting here. It's the same racial oppression, reproductive oppression, identity oppression. It's all the same. And so we have the tools. If we just kind of, you know, link the movements, I think we have a much better shot.
Actually working in intersectional scope, right?
Right.
I think that's very important. I think we don't see that often in the global aspect of it. It's very separated sometimes from the domestic, where it should be together. I really appreciate that. Right now, I think we're gonna open it up to questions. Oh, I just did something in the computer. Sorry, guys. I'm going to open it up to questions, but I also want to see if, you know, you've all have heard from each other, have heard from the work that they're doing domestically on sex work, on LGBT work, you know, the young people. So if you have any questions among yourselves, would you like to discuss that? I don't know that we have too many questions from our audience, but I would like to see maybe a little bit of a discussion if that is something that you're interested in doing.
Hey, Stephanie, this is Bella.
Yeah,
Not
Bella.
really a question, but I thought of something that's really important when we're thinking about sex education. So as someone that took the class to be certified to be an HIV professional test counselor, and someone that gets STD tested every 3 months for years, I found it amazing that, okay, so PrEP is a medication that high-risk people use to make sure they don't get HIV. PEP is the exact same medicine. So if you were to have a condom breakage or you were sexually assaulted and you get access to PEP within 72 hours, and you take it for 28 days, you're not going to get HIV. I find it ironic that doctors aren't telling this to women. And when you get an STD test, if you're a woman, they don't ask you what kind of sex. And to get too technical, but people that engage in anal sex have a higher risk of condom breakage, okay? So I think it's like they just assume all women don't do this, or,
Right.
and these are also, I think we're missing a huge part of preventative. And I think that sex education also needs to have conversations about what consent is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's very important. I do agree. Does anybody else have anything they want to say? Any questions among each other?
I have a question for Jina. If you don't know the answer, that's totally fine. I'm just curious to what extent, if there is any impact on if things move domestically in terms of policy and laws, does that have an impact on kind of what happens globally?
Like, for example, abortion laws, if they change here, does that, when you're talking about progress and sort of easing restrictions, that takes a really long time because law change just takes time. But what does kind of influence other parts of the world are the anti-abortion strategies. So we often see, in the same way you might see like a fetal heartbeat bill, like in South Africa, that was recently reintroduced, which it previously had not been kind of common. We wouldn't see that type of anti-abortion legislation. So many of these groups they work globally. So they, if something works in terms of reducing access to abortion, we'll see how we can apply that. There are CPCs, or crisis pregnancy centers, that are kind of coming up in parts of Latin America and some countries in Africa. And the language, the messaging, the rhetoric, sometimes, it can really be powerful and compelling in settings where, like I said, it's challenging. Abortion is stigmatized everywhere. It can be a taboo no matter where you are. So that tends to be more effective. And so, positive improvements in the law, of course, can sort of move us all towards the better, better access and reproductive justice. But unfortunately, that doesn't replicate as easily.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is Bella again, and I put a link in the chat because when we do things, when we're talking about global funding for aid, the US created the Anti-Prostitution Pledge, and after 10 years, it was struck down as unconstitutional. So if other countries wouldn't sign it, we didn't give them money for HIV, condoms, and malaria. Think about it, that's kind of evil. Brazil returned over $20 million to the US because they said, we're not doing this and undermining our public health and safety. This is stupid. And to mention that Brazil has one of the lowest HIV rates around the world. So if Congress passes anything, and even when it comes to the Hyde Amendment, that was because some Americans didn't want their tax dollars being spent that way. Well, quite frankly, I'm pretty sure most of us don't want our tax dollars spent on oppressing marginalized populations or wars, but that seems to be okay. So thank you. The global perspectives was very interesting.
Well, I appreciate your example because it is really evil to the way, if you think about the fact that this is attaching to aid that is needed for many things. And, that particular tactic, like I'm sure the NATO agreements, we don't require our Western allies to say they will not provide abortion care in order to be a part of this partnership, right? No, we only do it to countries that require assistance. And, that's our strategy here in the US too, right? Like Medicaid, Hyde was around for 30 years, more than that before it really, like, this energy that's here now is so incredible.
Yeah.
But, it worked here for a long time.
What is one thing you would like people to do coming out of today's conversation. And that goes for everyone. If you guys want to give me just one little brief sentence of what you think you want people to do coming out of today's meeting, and like in a call to action, so to speak. Bella, you want to go first?
Sure. I think the most important thing society can do is call out people that are stigmatizing sex workers or making dead hooker jokes. And when you think about this, when LGBTs was criminalized, when they got decriminalized, it still took a couple decades to shift social perception, where if you were hating on LGBT in public, you would be called out for that behavior, or should I say before Trump. Now it's back to normal again. So I think that's the best benefit we can do, is to start calling those narratives out. Thank you.
Taissa, you want to go?
Sure, yeah. I think for people who are kind of, we had a lot of different perspectives, especially at the intersection of different issues, which I really appreciate. And I think for people who that's new to, I think thinking about how different issues intersect with one another and thinking about how different movements can work together to kind of unite and have bigger political power. I think when you start thinking about how economic justice, the criminal legal system, how they all intersect with like reproductive justice, with environmental justice, once you start thinking about issues as all interconnected, I think that it becomes a little easier to like be involved or care about an issue, because it's impacting at least someone, it's impacting the communities that you care about. And also for folks that don't know too much about the Reaper space, or don't know a lot about like the words that were mentioned, it could be very overwhelming, I think, to kind of breach into this movement. And so I encourage people to kind of like go to a website, like one of these organizations' website, and look up just different fact sheets, just different, just like one-page fact sheets to read about what's happening. Even though it can seem a little overwhelming or a little bit too much, because there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of history of advocacy. So just start somewhere, and it'll be like a rabbit hole of research that you'll fall into.
Thank you. Monica, would you like to come and give us some information?
Sure. One of the first things I'll just say is continue to push back against respectability politics. And when I say respectability politics, I mean this idea of like quote unquote professionalism, and like there's a certain way to do things or be. Whether you're talking about like queer liberation, whether you're talking about the global stage and international policy, or you're talking about sex work, or you're talking about like abortion broadly, right? Like these issues didn't appear out of thin air, right? Like these issues are happening and are impacting people because the US and the world has a long history of oppressing certain populations, right? And so in order for us to get to a place where we have sex work decrim, where like we don't have abortion riders, anti-abortion riders attached to like spending bills, or we don't have folks having to deal with homophobia or transphobia, we have to push back on our own personal narratives and interrogate like the way that we do things and the way that we talk about things. So that would be the first thing I would say. And then the second thing is, I'm a policy person, so I have to say this: contact your legislators, especially your state and federal legislators. Like they literally work for you. And I'm not gonna lie, there are sometimes you can contact legislators and they're not gonna do what you want them to. Like they're just not, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. But it really is important to keep contacting them, whether it's state or federal, to have your voices heard, and to say that you took whatever step was necessary to like push back on something, or if it's something positive, right? Like we have really great folks in Congress, like Ayanna Pressley, like Cori Bush, like AOC, like we have these amazing people. They need to hear from us as well. So I think we have to keep contacting the people in power because they work for us. And so just keep doing that.
And let's not forget it, right? Like that is key. Sometimes we think we only have to communicate with our local government, but they have phone numbers too. They have emails. They have staffers where we can contact and have those conversations and speak up, and it's important. Gina, you're the last one, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I have to just kind of co-sign what everyone has said because it's all true to me too. I think just reiterating this point about make the conversation global and then stay in it over the long term so that, as movements, we really do align ourselves. And also remember that you are being represented by your government on these global stages, you meaning all of us. And so, in the last administration, they were in front of global United Nations bodies, the other countries of the world, saying the US no longer recognizes the term sexual and reproductive health and rights, like just removing language that has been around, so just remembering that you're being lumped into that. And I hope that helps motivate us all to kind of stay in this fight together, both here in the US, but also globally.
Thank you. I'm so fired up. I think this was such an inspiring conversation. I hope that viewers and the people that will see this after feel the same way. Take a listen to everything that they said, to the call of actions. Call your state, local, and federal representatives because it matters, it makes a difference. So I'm going to close right now. Thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone who took their time to listen to us, to get involved in efforts to make sure we are truly building a transformative and expansive movement that meets not just our health needs, but also ensures that we can have a relationship and sex lives that we want. This differs for every person, but it is such a key part of building a healthy and holistic lives that meet our needs and protect our decision making around our lives and futures across our mind, body, and spirit. There is work to do. This is just a conversation. There's definitely a lot of work to do. We know that, but with these amazing organizations and all of you, we know we will make a difference. Please follow all the incredible activists and organizations we spoke with today on their on the Womxn Project, the CaneiWalk, which is my organization, also the Louisiana Coalition for Reproductive Freedoms, our partners on the series. We hope that you will also mark your calendars for the next panel in the series called Sexual Health, Reproductive Justice, and Young People. So that sounds really fun, where we all will delve in further into the needs and experiences of young people. It is taking place on Tuesday, September 14th from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and will feature a briefing on cutting-edge new polling and messaging research from advocates for youth, and will include information about policies, programs, and insights from the Womxn Project, the Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health, SICUS, the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights, the New Orleans Abortion Fund, Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast. So we hope to see you all there at that amazing panel that is about to come up, just as good as this one. Thank you again. Now get out there and be the change and enjoy life and that you're creating yourselves. And remember, sex is part of the conversation. Don't forget it. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, ladies.